Tucked away in the early chapters of Genesis, there's this one passage that, well, it reads more like a wild myth than scripture. It's got to be one of the strangest, most debated, and honestly, one of the most fascinating stories in the entire Bible. It's this brief, cryptic mention that has sparked thousands of years of speculation about giants, fallen angels, and a world so corrupt it had to be completely washed clean. We're talking, of course, about the Nephilim.
I mean, just listen to that. The sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. It's so poetic and mysterious, and it just immediately fires off a ton of questions. Like, who exactly are these sons of God? And what about their children, these mighty men of old? What does that even mean?
And that, right there, is the central question for us today. Who or what were the Nephilim? To try and figure this out, we're going to break down the actual evidence from the biblical texts, and then we'll dive into the two huge theories that have been battling it out for centuries to explain this ancient enigma.
Okay, so before we get into any of the wild interpretations, we've got to start with the facts on the ground. Let's just look at what the biblical texts actually say about these beings. This is the raw data we have to work with. The first clue is right there in the language. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew word for the fallen ones. Then you've got this other related term, Rephaim, which can mean the dead ones. So right off the bat, the names themselves are pretty ominous, right? They're not called the great ones or the heroes, but the fallen and the dead. That definitely sets a tone. Now, the Nephilim don't show up often, but wow, when they do, they make a huge impact. In Genesis 6, they're basically the reason for the Great Flood. Then, hundreds of years later, in the book of Numbers, Israelite spies are absolutely terrified when they see them in the Promised Land. They literally say they felt like grasshoppers next to these giants. And they even pop up in Ezekiel, in a vision of the underworld, Sheol, right there among the most feared fallen warriors. The point is, every time they're mentioned, they are powerful, scary, and super intimidating. Okay, so with that textual evidence as our base, let's get into our first major theory. In this one, this is probably the most famous and definitely the most dramatic interpretation, the one that involves supernatural beings. The fallen angel theory suggests that the sons of God were exactly that, actual divine beings, angels, who rebelled. They basically abandoned their posts in heaven, came down to earth, and committed this massive transgression by procreating with human women, creating a kind of hybrid race. Now, the people who hold to this theory point to a few key things. For one, it explains why their children were heroes of old. Of course they were. They had supernatural parents. This idea is also backed up big time by ancient non-biblical texts, like the Book of Enoch, which gets into some really graphic detail, painting these giants as violent, cannibalistic tyrants who corrupted everybody. Plus, it makes sense of a pattern you see in the Bible. The Nephilim and their descendants, like Goliath, are always the enemies of God's people. And this gives a really powerful motive for the flood. God wasn't just wiping out sinful people, he was cleansing a genetically corrupted creation. But there is a major theological problem here. As one commenter points out, referencing the New Testament, Jesus himself says that angels in heaven don't marry. So how could they possibly have kids on earth? I mean, that seems like a pretty definitive shutdown of the whole idea. But wait, the debate doesn't end there. The immediate comeback, as another commenter passionately argues, is that we're not talking about your regular rule-following angels. We're talking about fallen angels, demons, rebels. Their whole deal is rejecting God's order. So who's to say they wouldn't break the rules of angelic nature precisely as an act of rebellion, just to corrupt and blaspheme God's new creation? And this intense back and forth leads us right into the second major theory, one that totally avoids all the supernatural drama and gives us a much more grounded, purely human explanation. This slide here lays out the difference perfectly, where the first theory sees this supernatural event, a clash between angels and humans. The Sephathite theory sees a social and religious clash between two different human families. So according to this interpretation, the sons of God weren't angels at all. They were just men from the godly family line of Seth, who was Adam's righteous son. And the daughters of men, well, they were women from the worldly, unrighteous line of Cain, the first murderer. The great sin here wasn't supernatural, it was spiritual. The holy line was intermarrying with the unholy line, totally abandoning their faith and getting swallowed up by a corrupt culture. And the evidence for this view is pretty compelling in its own way. That title, Sons of God, is actually used in other parts of the Bible to describe faithful people. It also completely sidesteps that tricky theological problem of angels having babies. And here's a really key point. The Hebrew word that we translate as giants can also just mean tyrants or bullies. So maybe they weren't physically huge, but were just powerful, oppressive human warlords.
From this angle, the wickedness that caused the flood was the complete spiritual decay that happened when the line of faith just got erased by the line of corruption. But this theory has its own big challenge, and this commenter's question nails it. If both groups were just people, why does the text make such a sharp, clear distinction between sons of God and daughters of men? The way the sentence is written really seems to imply two fundamentally different kinds of beings. It's a really powerful point against this all-human view. So what we have are two competing theories, and both have really strong arguments, and some pretty big weaknesses. And that ambiguity? That's precisely why the story of the Nephilim has echoed through thousands of years, evolving from this ancient, mysterious text into a source for modern fascination and, yeah, even conspiracy. What's absolutely wild is that this idea, this archetype of a race of powerful giants or hybrids born from a union between the divine and the mortal, it's not just in the Bible. You see it everywhere. It's in Greek mythology with the Titans, these demigods born from gods and mortals. You find it in all sorts of Native American legends about powerful, often cannibalistic giants, some with really strange features like 6 fingers or 2 rows of teeth. And this idea even fuels theories about our own planet, that massive ancient structures, these megaliths like Stonehenge, could only have been built by beings with superhuman strength. And this story is still so alive today. This comment right here shows you how that ancient narrative about the Nephilim gets mapped directly onto our modern anxieties. The fallen angels become UFOs. The corruption of human DNA becomes alien abductions by the Greys. The ancient mystery gives people a framework for trying to understand modern mysteries. But ultimately, the real power of the Nephilim story might not be about finding the right answer. Its lasting power is in the profound boundaries it makes us think about. The line between heaven and earth, between the sacred and the profane, between what it means to be human and what it means to be monstrous. It's a story about what happens when those lines get violently crossed. So, what do you think? Were the Nephilim real supernatural monsters? A mythologized memory of ancient, brutal warlords? Or maybe a timeless message about the dangers of corruption that we're still trying to figure out? The text just leaves us with the mystery. And maybe the real point is that we're still wrestling with these exact same questions about boundaries, transgression, and the monstrous, both out there in the world and inside ourselves. The search continues.